What if the entire Confederate defense of Vicksburg relied on deceptions? Deceptions so profound they veiled an army from the tornado of iron and resolve advancing upon them, commanded by Ulysses S. Grant. Today we reveal the 5 crippling falsehoods the Confederacy clung to at Vicksburg and how Grant smashed each one in a matter of days, forever transforming the Civil War. Hit that like button and subscribe immediately to enlist in our History Detective Unit. You won't wish to overlook this exposé. Prepared to unearth the buried reality? Let's begin. The Union's campaign to capture Vicksburg encountered persistent obstacles. It commenced in May 1862 with an unsuccessful naval assault on Confederate artillery. Summer advances also failed, resulting in Ulysses S. Grant assuming command as winter neared. Engineers then initiated an audacious plan. Excavate a canal adjacent to the city to divert the Mississippi River and circumvent Vicksburg's fortifications. Military commanders hoped altering the river's course would render Vicksburg obsolete. However, tropical illnesses such as malaria and dysentery, coupled with oppressive heat, swiftly halted the project, striking workers with sickness. When January came, Grant resumed excavations under President Lincoln's direct scrutiny, with progress reports dispatched daily to the White House. Although Grant was skeptical the canal would succeed, he recognized the benefit of keeping soldiers occupied and primed for a spring campaign. From January to March 1863, 5 further assaults, including a naval maneuver on the Yazoo River, failed to breach Vicksburg's defenses. Grant later described these as reconnaissance missions that demonstrated the city's near-total impregnability. As digging persisted into March, rising waters breached the dikes, inundating the incomplete canal. Union engineers employed steam dredges to clear the passage, but Confederate observers on the bluffs rapidly targeted them with lethally precise fire. This final setback ended the hydraulic strategy permanently. With alternatives dwindling, General Grant executed a daring shift, a full-scale land assault from Vicksburg's eastern flank. To accomplish this encircling movement, his army required a way to infiltrate behind Confederate lines. Troops marched south along the river's western shore, but a crossing demanded naval support. Rear Admiral David Porter's fleet was essential here. On April 16th, under intense Confederate fire, Porter piloted his ironclads past Vicksburg's forts in a hazardous nighttime dash. Initial attempts to land at Grand Gulf foundered, forcing Union troops farther south to Bruinsburg. The April 30th river crossing there commenced Grant's invasion of Confederate Mississippi. While future supply lines would become crucial later, the troops now survived on what they carried. History reveals Grant's unshakable assurance here stemmed from prior experience. In earlier Vicksburg operations, severed supply lines had compelled his men to successfully forage from crops and farms. Grant was convinced his army could temporarily sustain itself on local provisions if necessary. Contrary to popular belief, he never completely severed his supply lines. Grant's memoirs note a separation on May 3rd, causing some confusion. Records confirm only a 72-hour interval in supplies occurred between the Bruinsburg crossing and the capture of Grand Gulf on May 3rd. After seizing Grand Gulf, Grant established an ingenious resupply system. Wagons laden with ammunition and hardtack utilized a concealed riverside path through the floodplain. Critics like General Sherman warned this narrow route could not sustain 50,000 men and advised a halt. Grant's response clarified his intention. Combine carried rations with local food to maintain the Army's momentum. Bread and coffee would preserve fighting morale until full supplies resumed. This gamble highlighted Grant's flexibility and secured the campaign's success. Though Vicksburg was the ultimate objective, Grant remained methodical. His initial target in Mississippi became Port Gibson because it commanded the roads connecting Grand Gulf to Jackson. Capturing this junction would grant the Union control of the Southern Railroad, Vicksburg's critical supply lifeline. After losing Grand Gulf, Confederate General John Bowen suspected Grant would cross the river and identified Port Gibson as the likely target. Grant then dispatched Colonel Benjamin Grierson on a cavalry raid deep into enemy territory to divert the Confederates. Meanwhile, desperate Confederate pleas for reinforcements reached General John Pemberton, who followed his orders to protect Vicksburg over dispatching aid. After crossing the river, Union forces divided to encircle Port Gibson's two primary roads, thinning Confederate defensive lines. Combat ignited before sunrise on May 1st when Union scouts encountered concealed Confederate soldiers near the thickets of Magnolia Church. Pemberton's delay in sending reinforcements proved disastrous. Despite ferocious resistance, outnumbered Southern troops suffered heavy casualties and withdrew. Bowen later lamented his men fought valiantly but were simply overpowered. The retreat trapped hundreds of Confederates as prisoners and compelled the abandonment of Fort Coburn, surrendering Grand Gulf's approaches to the Union. Losing Port Gibson shattered Vicksburg's outer armor, transforming Grant's Grand Gulf setback into a victory that secured two crucial areas. This triumph opened a direct path toward Vicksburg, proving Grant's phased strategy was effective. Grant understood taking Vicksburg required first halting Confederate reinforcements. After Port Gibson, he avoided a direct assault on the city, choosing instead to devastate its supply networks. His eastern flank strategy depended on crippling enemy logistics before the final assault. The Southern Railroad of Mississippi was pivotal. Intelligence indicated General Joseph Johnston had arrived in Jackson with troops intended for Vicksburg, increasing the urgency. Grant immediately recognized Johnston's force as the principal danger. Fortune intervened when Johnston, erroneously believing Vicksburg was indefensible, withdrew his men to Canton, leaving Jackson vulnerable. On May 14th, Grant's army seized Mississippi's capital, destroying war industries and railroads to disable Confederate operations. Union spies later intercepted Johnston's orders, instructing Pemberton to advance toward Clinton. Although Grant knew Johnston's true location, he accelerated his operations to prevent the Confederate armies from merging. Historians contend Johnston's scheme was to sacrifice Vicksburg to draw Union forces into Killing Grounds. Pemberton, however, remained fixated on defending Vicksburg, anticipating reinforcements before a siege. Both commanders misjudged the situation. Johnston's trap collapsed, and Pemberton's reinforcements never arrived, leaving Vicksburg isolated. With rescue impossible and starvation spreading, they discussed surrender. Initially, they rejected Grant's demand for unconditional surrender. Grant then proposed parole, allowing defenders to return home if they pledged not to fight until Vicksburg was securely in Union hands. This was pragmatic. Grant lacked the resources to detain thousands of prisoners. Confronting annihilation, Confederate commanders accepted the terms on July 4, 1863. This surrender granted the Union complete control of the Mississippi River, cleaving the Confederacy in two. The victory hastened the South's downfall, leading to Union triumph 2 years later. Vicksburg's fall was more than a military conquest. It was the instant Confederate delusions shattered against Grant's irresistible reality. But this leaves a pressing question. If the South had confronted those falsehoods sooner, could they have endured? Or was Vicksburg's fate sealed from the outset? What was the single critical error that condemned them? Challenge me in the comments section, and if this revelation shook your historical perspective, hit that share button, subscribe for further astonishing investigations, and ring the bell so you always catch our next journey into history. Remain inquisitive until the next episode.